Okay, welcome back. This is part 4 of the video, and in this part I'm going to build the extruder. I have all of the parts for it laid out here in front of me. I've got the stepper motor for the extruder and the hot end. This is a J-head hot end that's already been assembled. It's got wires for the heater and the thermistor both coming off. I've got a 40mm square by 10mm thick 12-volt fan. And then I have the printed parts for the extruder, the body, the fan duct, the small and big gears, and the idler. Then I have the hob bolt that I'm using. This is this was made by Airwolf 3D. It's a 8mm bolt that's had these little hobbed, knurled grooves cut into it. I've got two springs that will provide tension for the extruder. These are 1 inch long. They're real stiff springs. 3 608 roller skate bearings, a couple M8 washers, and an M8 lock nut. I've got 2 M3 by 60mm screws and 4 30mm long M3 screws. I've got 7 14mm M3 screws and a single 8mm M3 screw. And I've got 4 M3 washers and 11 M3 nuts and 1 short piece of M8 smooth rod, which has been cut down to about 20mm or slightly less in length. Now, the first step in building the extruder, you're going to want to prep the extruder body, and this one I already have, so I have here a second one. This is a brand new one that I just printed, and I didn't remove any of the support material from it so that I could show you how that is supposed to work. Whenever you print something with sections that hang out in the air, you need to print material that's used to support those overhangs, and it's material that you get rid of after the print's finished. So the extruder body has a few pieces of that support material built into it, and they snap right off. So you can see how this fulcrum is just supported during printing by this little box underneath it. So I'm just using needle nose pliers to just remove that. The support material is made to break away, so it's real thin and it's barely attached, specifically so that you can get it off like that and it won't take anything off that you don't want to. Then there's the fulcrum here that's used to support the fan duct. It also has support material. So I just break that off. And then there might be little bits that don't come right off, and you can trim them with wire cutters. And there might be a few little pieces of plastic that are just hanging around. Get rid of those with a file, or a X-Acto blade also works for this. You might want to clean out this hole a little bit. I'll show you why in a minute. And now the hole in the center here is where the hobbed bolt is supposed to go through the extruder. But when it's printed, just like the fulcrums need support material, that hole, in order for it to print that circular hole, it needs something to print on top of. So there's a single layer of plastic that's built into the part. So what you should do is get a drill and get your 5/16 inch or 8mm approximately drill bit and just go straight through this part and clean it out. can check that by just put the bolt through there. It should just, you know, go right through. Now there's also a hole that runs through the center of the body. That's where the filament actually gets fed down into the hot end. And the hole that's built into this model is slightly over 3 millimeters in diameter. And I'm actually going to use 1.75 millimeter filament on the printer that we're building here, but so there's not going to be any problem with that. But if I were printing, say, 3 millimeter filament, which this is a small piece of, then you want to check that this has good clearance before you start assembling it. You see how that's too tight? Our filament is going to have a hard time getting through there. So get your drill again and go back to the 9/64 inch bit, which is a little more than 3 millimeters, and clean that hole out all the way through. Like that. And if you don't have a piece of filament yet because you're building the printer and you haven't got filament and you're going to be printing 3 millimeter, then I would recommend you just do that without, you know, bothering to check. I mean, it's not going to, if it's not already that big, it's not going to make it bigger. And you see now this slides nice through there. There's also a hole for M3 bolts on these two fulcrums. You can see how you can see the holes on this side but not on this side, and that's because of that support material. So while I've got this same bit, I'll just clean those. Now that will work a lot easier when we put it together. Alright, so that's how you prep the extruder body. Okay, so next, check the small gear that it fits onto the end of the stepper motor well, and if it's too tight, then get your drill, and this time get a 13/64 drill bit and just run it through the gear. You may have to hold this with pliers because if it's too tight it's going to really want to turn. And then check it again and it should fit nicely. This one's pretty loose actually, but it's okay. Then get the one of your M3 nuts, and this should slide down into this slot on the top of the gear. And if you need to press it in with pliers or heat set it in with your soldering iron again, do that. And then once the hole's lined up, get the M3/8, which is the really short screw, and just add that through there until it just starts to come through the center. And then let's just go ahead and put this on here for now. We'll adjust the set point or the placement of the gear on the shaft later if we need to, but for now that's on there. So then get the fan duct and the fan, and we'll go ahead and attach those. The outlet side of the fan is generally the one with the label, so the label should go towards the duct, and these holes on the fan duct here are attached at the top, so you want the wires to drape off that side most likely, rather than down into the way. And then get 4 of the M3/14mm screws and 4 of the M3 nuts, and just attach each one of these. Okay, and set this aside. Now get the idler for the extruder and one of the M3 nuts. And if you look on the inside of these two little ears sticking out at the bottom, one of them has a little hexagonal inset where this screw is supposed to fit. And you may need, the first time you put it in there, you may need to take your pliers and just gently press it in. But be really careful with this part. This is probably one of the most likely things that a person might break the first time they build one of these, and it's the only one of its kind in the kit, so you want to be careful. You can always glue it back together, at least cobble it together long enough to print another one if you have to. And then take an M3 by 30 millimeter screw and just thread it enough that it starts into that, and then set this aside. And now get the body of the extruder and the large gear and the hobbed bolt, and start with these two. The hobbed bolt just goes through the large gear, and on the flat side of the big gear there should be a inset where the hexagonal head of the bolt will snap in like that, and then put an M8 flat washer on there. And then on the extruder body there will be two bearings that hold this bolt in place. So get the first one, one of the 608 bearings, and snap it in on this side. And it should go all the way in until it's against the plastic. And if it doesn't go in that easily, get your file or an X-Acto blade and kind of clean this lower edge out because it might be protruding a little bit, making it too tight. Then you can fit the hobbed bolt through here, and the little knurled hobbed part of the bolt should line up with the filament guide hole through the bottom of through the center of the extruder. And as long as it's within, if it goes a little past it, it's okay. If it doesn't go quite to it, then maybe take off this washer. The reason it might vary is based on how far the person that built your bolt decided to put these little grooves. So if I didn't mention it earlier, this bolt is a Airwolf 3D made bolt, and I've used several from them. They're always made the same, so hopefully yours will fit as well. But if the hobbed part of the bolt goes way past that hole, then take this off and add another washer. But as long as it's really close like this is, then leave well enough alone. Get another 608 bearing and put it on the free end of the bolt, and it should go right into that little grooved spot. And then put another M8 washer on after that. Then get the M8 lock nut and put that on. And to tighten this down, you'll need a 13 millimeter wrench. So get one, and then just hold the large gear with your other hand and tighten this on. And don't make it too tight like I just did, because now the hobbed part of the bolt is too far past the guide hole. So I'll just loosen it a little bit. There. And see, it's got a little bit of free play, but that's okay. The pressure from the idler is going to keep that centered as long as we've got it close enough. Now get the idler, and with the idler screw and that nut already in place, this should fit over the fulcrum here, and you can thread the screw all the way through. It'll go through to the other side of the hinge. Okay. And then that short rod is used as the pivot for this last 608 bearing, and it should drop down into here. If it doesn't drop in, it just means that the little smooth rod is maybe a little too long. So either gently press it in with pliers or grind the, file down the ends of it a little bit until it does fit. It would be better if this was a little stiffer, actually, a little bit harder to get in and out, because as this is, it'll fall out on me. But and then pivot that up like that. I'll get 2 of the M3 nuts that are left, and one goes into each of these little holes that's built into the top. Spin them around so that they go the right way, and then press them until they're into the bottom of it. Then get the 2 long screws. These might be 50 millimeters, they might be 60 millimeters, and put an M3 washer on the screw, and then one of the 2 springs, and then another washer. And then thread this through one of the 2 sides and into that nut that we dropped in there. And then do the same thing with the other one. Washer, spring, washer. When you pull against this with your thumb, you should feel the tension from the springs. Okay, and then next I would attach the motor. So get the motor with the small gear already attached, and just lay it on here like this so that the 2 gears will mesh together. And if the small gear is a little too far out, loosen that screw if you need, or just push it in like that. It wasn't tight enough yet. And get it like that. You may want to turn it so that the wires from the motor are pointed up. Probably back would also be okay. Won't get in the way. And then attach the motor. You have to visually just line that up with these 3 slots. There's one inside the large gear. And then get your 3 remaining M3 by 14 millimeter screws and attach the motor. Probably easier if you just leave the motor sitting on the table. Leave the first screw a little loose until you get the others in place, because you can use the slots that these screws are going through to move to translate the motor, so that the gears mesh just right, just enough, but not so much that they bind up. Sometimes people will have trouble if the spacing isn't quite right on the bolt, that this screw that I'm putting in now, the head of that screw might actually not clear the large gear. This one does, but if it doesn't, then I would maybe just not put that screw in. And then you can pretty easily tell if you just rotate them that these 2 gears are meshing together real nicely, so I'll just tighten these down now. Okay. And now the only thing left to do, well, almost the only thing left to do, is to put the hot end in. And the hot end just snaps into this bottom section, and you see this collar that's around it. The bolts that we're going to put in are going to grab that in order to keep this in place. So first just get that in, and I actually want these wires to be on the same side as my motor wires, so I'll just pivot the whole thing around until they're like that. And then get 2 of the M3 30mm screws and put those through this side On the other side, again, there's 2 spots for a nut, which you may or may not actually need to use for this because these M3 screws are going to bite into the plastic as they go through, and they're actually going to be held pretty well. If you want to use the nuts, probably a good idea to put those in first so that you can have them in. And if you need to take the pliers and gently press them in, you could. Okay, so back to the screws. Almost done. So now we should have one M3 nut and one 30mm long screw left, and that's to attach the fan duct. You could use a 20mm M3 for this, but in order not to have a one-off part on the parts list, I didn't say 20mm on the parts list. I said 30 because I was already using 30s. So there will be a little extra. There. Alright, so that's our completed extruder. The only thing I'm going to do next is I'm going to take all of my wires from the fan and the motor and the hot end, and I'm just going to tie wrap them, zip tie them together to give everything a little bit extra strain relief so that we aren't putting a lot of tension on any of these. Though, another thing that I want to mention real quick before we wrap this part up is the length of these wires. These are pretty long. I've got about 80 centimeters here of wire from the motor to the end of the connector, and the same for the other two. And that's because the extruder is going to be the farthest thing from the electronics, and the wires probably are going to go up over the frame and then back down, so they end up being quite long. So that would be something to take into account before you start. Alright, I think that's it for this. In the next part I'll get the 4 sub-assemblies that we've built, and I'll bring all 4 of them together. Thanks.